Jim Willis, Marcellus Drilling News.
Boy, those levels look really good. Mines are a little hot, so Provolone, just turn that mic down a little bit. All right, thank you very much. Jim Willis, Marcellus Drilling News, joining us here today. And I wanted to bring him on to get an update, of course, from the East Coast and the Marcellus area, the Marcellus Utica, just, a nice up-to-date what's going on as we are a couple months into 2020. But as I'm looking at his website, marcellusdrillingnews.com, I'm seeing an article that is headlined, John Hess says shale oil close to peak. Global warming is real. And, we just talked about Hess yesterday on how he said, it's plateaued and they're ramping up some of their projections. And we actually spun it into a different conversation about rig counts, how we have to revamp rig counts. And I'd like to get back to the rig count thing in just a second. But talk to me a little bit about that. John Hess says shale oil close to peak and global warming is real. Is it coming off of that plateau comment that he said?
Yeah, I believe it is. So he was. It's nice to be on your program, Jason. I appreciate it. John was speaking yesterday in Houston at an Argus event, Crude event that they host, and I came across a couple of different articles, and the one I happened to pull from was a Reuters article talking about his comments at that event, and it kind of struck me for a couple of reasons. So, I write about largely the Marcellus and Utica in the Northeast, which covers basically Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and it's largely about natural gas. Although we do some liquids, we have natural gas liquids, we have some oil, some crude that's produced out of our basins as well. But when I saw that, those comments from him, I mean, he's a big deal, right? I mean, Hess is a huge company, and they have big operations in the Bakken. And so when I see someone like a John Hess talking about that shale oil in particular across the different plays, the Bakken and the Permian in particular, is close to peaking and is going to be heading, in the downward direction, that kind of catches my attention for a lot of different reasons. But he's a respected industry figure, and we, as much as I'd like to, I can't just dismiss what he says. Because he's dialed into this stuff. So my take on this was, and the thing that I focused on were a few of the comments that he said. And he said, one of the quotes was, U.S. shale is important, but it's not the next Saudi Arabia. I
saw that, yeah.
It's like, well, we're producing more than Saudi Arabia, so it's coming from shale. So what does he really mean by that comment? So that kind of intrigued me. And he also said, essentially, I'm putting this in my own words, but he said that he's going to drill all he can in the Bakken, over the next few years, and he's going to use that money so he can buy up offshore oil plays because that's where the real action is in the future.
I took similar things away from what you took away from John Hess's comments at the Argus America's Crude Summit held in Houston. And the Saudi Arabia thing I got, but what I kind of took away from that is that this is, it's a global marketplace, and Hess is going to become global. And, they're going to, you do what they can in the States, but not only is because really when you look at it, they talked about the shale revolution being a 30-year play, and we're close to 10 years in now. So, if there is a plateau of 10 years and then a little bit, and then a downward trend after that, okay, I get that. I didn't read it that it would like start peaking on a downward slope. I guess I looked at the word plateau as, okay, we'd kind of level off for a little bit, which I get. And that's where I go back to the rig count thing, because I think the whole notion of how the industry counts rigs needs to be redone, because they're pumping out more oil than they did before, but yet rig counts continue to go down. So that you don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that needs to be revamped. What I took away from it though was that for some of these oil companies now, in order to sustain their size, they have to go global, and they now just have to say it. They knew it before. They had a hard time saying it, American independence and all this stuff, but now the reality's setting in to where, you know what, there's going to be a race for those Arctic leases, and there's going to be a race for, African leases, and et cetera. That's the nature of the beast now. I kind of looked at it, but anyway, I thought the comments too were interesting. So, by the way, MarcellusDrilling.com is the website if you want to check out, where Jim Willis puts his news and information and his blog posts and et cetera. But I wanted to get an update from you on just the energy activity, but also from the environmental political vibe out there as well. I know Pennsylvania is what do they call it? A swing state in the political world. So, it can go any way. It's a coal country, but yet pretty progressive too in certain areas. You got Philadelphia. So,
Pittsburgh.
And Pittsburgh. Oh, I love Pittsburgh, by the way. I thought Pittsburgh was going to be dirty and steel mills, and man, I went there about 20 years ago and just fell in love with that place. I went down.
It's a beautiful city. I love Pittsburgh too.
Oh, I went down to the Pirates game and just enjoyed.
Oh yeah, and that's a great stadium, isn't it?
Just enjoyed myself down by the river complex. And talk to me about what's going on in Pennsylvania and the Marcellus and Utica.
Sure. Well, so in Pennsylvania, I mean, it's an interesting dichotomy. If we want to talk about the election, if the election were held today, because of most Democrat candidates' words about banning fracking, there's a lot of angst amongst the Democrats in Pennsylvania, because they know that they're not going to win the state. It's not going to go blue, or with that kind of talk. So even though you have those pockets, like we said, in Philly and Pittsburgh, that tilt to the left, the rest of the state is, I would say, is pretty much pro fracking, pro shale. They see the benefits, especially in the northeastern part of the state, which is not, so where I live and write is in the Binghamton, New York area. So I always joke that I work behind enemy lines, because, the state here has, at least for the time being, has banned fracking. But 15 miles from where I'm sitting right now, across the border, is Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. And in Susquehanna County, it's, the example I always use is there's one company, Cabot Oil and Gas. I mean, there's more companies that drill there, but Cabot Oil and Gas drills exclusively in Susquehanna County, and they produce by themselves about 2.5% of all the natural gas that's produced in the United States today. And that's one company in one county, and not far from where I am. So needless to say, with the money that's been pumped into that economy in Susquehanna County and in the northeastern part of the state, very, very pro-shale, in those parts of the state. So
now you've got, is it Governor Wolf? Is my memory correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Has he kind of come out for or against it? And I'll preface it by saying, and obviously what's going on in Colorado. They're leading the charge on trying to do the anti-frack at the state level. New Mexico's governor kind of made some interesting comments in her state of the state, or State of the Union, whatever they call it down there. and to where the headlines read, no love for oil and gas. And so she tried to tiptoe it a little bit, but the industry basically called her out and saying, okay, no, you're not going to have your cake and eat it here too. You're going to have to pick a side here. What's going on with the governor at the state level? You mentioned something about some of the Democrats are realizing the economic and the energy impact it's going to have, and so it sounds like they're being somewhat logical in this whole thing and not getting caught up in the platitudes. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, with Wolf, he's an interesting study. I guess the best way that I could characterize it is he's certainly not as bad as we could have, but he's not a full-throated endorser of shale energy. So what he's doing right now and has been doing for a number of years is he's trying to enact a severance tax on the production, in addition to a tax that already exists. So there's something called an impact fee, which is really an impact tax, and and the activity is taxed in a slightly different way than a severance tax. Severance tax, of course, any production that comes out of the ground, you pay a certain percentage as a tax. With an impact fee, the producers are paying for every well they drill. They pay a certain amount the first year, and then a certain amount the next year, and it goes on for like 5 or 6 years, something like that. And so it ends up being roughly the equivalent of a severance tax is what it ends up being in the end. Wolf has, in classic Democrat style, he's promised, a grab bag of goodies, all these wonderful things that can be yours for $4.5 billion that I could raise by enacting a severance tax on top of the existing impact tax, which would catapult Pennsylvania into having the highest, if you were to combine them, the highest severance tax in the nation. So it's an existential threat. The only thing that holds it back is that Pennsylvania's legislature, both the House of Delegates and the Senate, are both controlled by Republicans, and so they've been a check against his call, year after year to enact the severance tax. So on that side, he threatens the industry. On the other side, though, he does allow pipelines. His Department of Environmental Protection plays ball with the producers in granting permits, and not only permits for drilling, but for the pipeline activities and all that. There's always a push and a pull with any environmental agency. There's always problems, there's delays, they take too long to issue their permits, et cetera, et cetera. But, overall, they play ball, they do a pretty good job. So, on balance, he could have really done great harm to the industry, but he has not. And so for that, we'll give him maybe not a gold star, we'll give him a silver star. And it's going okay at this point.
Marcellus Drilling News. Jim Willis on the phone with us here. Talk to me a little bit about the Marcellus. Are people finding some success out there still? Are there certain pockets that are hotter than others? Down the Permian, you got the Midland area. Up in the Bakken, you've got Watford City, Williston. Where are some of those areas in the Marcellus where people are finding success?
Well, the Marcellus classically in Pennsylvania has always been in the northeastern part of the state where there's dry gas, and in the southwestern part of the state, around the Pittsburgh metro, that region in the southwestern corner of the state. It is found in other parts of the state, in the center part of the state as well, but those are the two primary areas. And in the southwestern part of the state, you have NGLs, a lot of NGLs, maybe even a little bit of crude production. And so in the northeastern part of the state, traditionally Chesapeake Energy has been up here, Chief Oil and Gas, Cabot Oil and Gas, Southwestern Energy has a big presence in the northeastern part of the state. Southwestern part of the state, you have companies like CNX Resources, Range Resources. Range, of course, was the very first company to actually drill a Marcellus well in the southwestern part of the state. And then you move down into the sort of the northern portion of West Virginia, and Antero Resources is a really big driller in that area. And then you kind of shift over into eastern Ohio and the Utica, and frankly, the Marcellus also juts over there as well. And I just wrote another post today about Montage Resources, because they're increasing their activity in drilling in the Ohio Marcellus, which is, I guess I can't say it. It's just so odd to say Ohio Marcellus. You always say Ohio Utica and Pennsylvania Marcellus, but there's actually Marcellus over there in Ohio too. So Montage is over there. Encino Energy bought out Chesapeake's assets in Ohio a few years ago, and so they do quite a bit of drilling over there as well. And I know I'm probably forgetting a few others, but that's kind of how it sorts out. And eastern Ohio, again, there's sort of the dry gas sections, but a lot of the eastern portion of the state in the Utica, you get down into certain counties like Belmont and Monroe and Jefferson, some of those counties, and there's a lot of liquids production over there. So Mark West Energy, which is now MPLX, has a lot of processing capacity, processing facilities, fractionation facilities there, and over on sort of the Pennsylvania Marcellus side, you see a lot of infrastructure from Williams, for instance. That's sort of it's a very, very high-level view of like how it all sorts out.
This might be a little outside your reach, but do you get much into Michigan? Do you cover Michigan at all?
I'll talk about it periodically for different reasons, mostly for pipelines.
Okay.
So the Rover pipeline goes from the western reaches of Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, all the way through Ohio and up into Michigan, before it goes on and connects to a pipeline system that goes to Sarnia, up to Ontario. And also the Nexus pipeline also heads in that direction. So, and every now and again I'll see things about gas power plants. So, one of the big opportunities in our region, sort of this side of the country, is gas-fired power generation. And so some of that, happens in Michigan and, of course, Illinois and, Indiana and places like that. So because our gas, another pipeline system that goes across the country that reversed part of itself is the Rockies Express, right? So it used to come out of Colorado and go all the way to Ohio. And the Ohio portion all the way back to Missouri, trying to reach for the name in my mind. I can't come up with it, but that entire portion has reversed its flow to carry Utica and Marcellus gas over into the Midwestern part of the country. So when I see stories come around that deal with like power gen and major facilities that are using natural gas in that part of the country, Michigan and Illinois and Indiana, I will sometimes write about those simply because some of our gas is going to go there because it's coming through REX and it's going in that direction. And another pipeline story in the Midwestern part of the country I've written about is Spire. It's a St. Louis company, utility, that built a short pipeline to connect to REX in order to move that Utica and Marcellus gas into the St. Louis market. So our gas, reaches not only the East Coast and the Southeast. We have pipelines that take it to the Gulf Coast, and we have pipelines that take it to the Midwest and up into Canada as well.
Are you guys hearing or feeling any of the pressure from the youth like they are in some of the other cities and states? And, Michigan, they had some kids go before a city declaring climate emergency. We had it in Fargo. It's just it's popping up all over the place. And what's the vibe out there in Pennsylvania?
Well, in Pennsylvania, so I recently put together, in anticipation of our talk today, actually, in another talk I recently gave, I kind of put together my list of threats. What are the things that I see that I'm concerned about in 2020? And one of those you just mentioned, which is the way I would classify this. Yes, there is that sort of movement out here, typically on college campuses, and the thing that I would that comes to mind immediately is something I wrote about today, which is in a passing note on an article that I highlighted. University of Pennsylvania students have been protesting and demanding, and they've been doing this for months, maybe even more than a year, that the school divest itself, its investments, from anything to do with fossil fuels. And so the University of Pennsylvania, until now, has pushed back and said, no, our investments are not going to make political statements and that sort of thing. But they did make an announcement recently that they are divested and will not invest in anything to do with thermal coal and oil sands. And I guess the question I have is, how much longer will it be before that migrates into something else? And we have this all over the place. It's not just Pennsylvania and other, in New York State, of course. But there's this move on to force investment firms and banks to stop doing business, to stop investing in or loaning money to any companies that have anything to do with producing fossil fuels, and that concerns me. It bugs me and it concerns me. And yes, we do have it here. Maybe not quite as much as someplace like California, but it is here.
We did a headline last week. We talked about it on our podcast. Terry Edom and I, the author, the writer, the blogger up in Canada, spoke about this as well. Sacramento, they had a protest where children, they interviewed a 12-year-old in the story. The headline said teens, but the person they interviewed in the story was 12. And they drenched themselves in fake oil, and then to protest the teachers' pension fund. Okay, the teachers' pension fund, they used children to drench them in oil to go to the state capitol and protest to divest their teachers' pension fund from fossil fuel companies. That is, to me, using children for a specific use, like a weapon, like I've ever seen. And
don't get me started on that. I consider that brainwashing. I think that's child abuse to do something like that. But here's the thing. Those poor little children that are frankly ignorant, they really don't know any better. And I don't care if they're 12, I don't care if they're 22 in college. It's the same mindset. And what they don't realize as they're protesting and demanding these things, like petulant children, demanding that they divest, they don't even stop to consider that the clothes on their body are made out of fibers that come from oil and gas, that the sneakers on their feet come from oil and gas, that the signs that they're holding, if they're made out of a plastic material, come from oil and gas, that the vehicles they got to those protests in are made from oil and gas and powered by oil and gas. And this is just, I don't know what the word is. It's schizophrenic. It's ludicrous, to protest something that your very life depends on.
This is what's concerning to me, though, is because there are leaders out there that either are political leaders or industry leaders, or I'll even say it, law enforcement leaders at some point. I'm not saying police, but at some point somebody of some authority has to set in and say, because you said brainwashing, and I don't know if I'd go that far, but I would. I mean, I certainly, I wouldn't hold you back from arguing your point on it. I think it's more along the lines of, child abuse and certain things along those lines, because I look at it like this, where it's gotten so accepted to bash fossil fuels that parents now are bringing these kids to protests like they would to a soccer game, and then probably going out for pizza and talking about what a great job they did. So it's a totally different, and that's the part I don't think the energy industry understands they're up against right now. Is it is an accepted form of bullying, and they're using children as their weapon, and it's a fight that I don't think they're equipped for. The energy industry is very brash, very logical, and that doesn't do well with children. I mean, try to raise a teenager on logic. Good luck on that. Really. I always laugh because, we're talking about the climate, one of the most complex things ever, okay? And I would even say it's probably even more complex than a teenager. We don't even know how to raise teenagers yet. How can we figure out the climate? I mean, these are complex systems, and we think that a computer model is going to figure it out. That's a different topic for a different day. But getting back to the kids and everything, what do you make of that? You're in the media. At what point does the media have a responsibility to say, okay, California teachers' pension, you don't get to use kids anymore. You can go and dress up like children and do that, but stop using kids for your own personal gain, because that is a personal gain when you're talking about a teacher's fund versus the planet. I mean, a planet was a stretch before, but now they're actually, going to different bank accounts and talking like that.
Yeah. It's kids are being made into celebrities, Greta Thunberg, for instance. And I feel bad about that. I mean, I'm angry in some senses that happens, but I feel bad for Greta, and
I do too.
I think it's a tragedy. Kids are off limits. They're off limits in politics. I don't care, who's running and how much I detest their positions. Their kids are off limits. That's you don't go there. And I think equally when it comes to this issue, kids should be off limits, and to use them for sound bites and to pull on heartstrings, it's just wrong.
I want to ask you another pontification I've made, where some have called me the shale play prophet and others have called me crazy, but either way, I've been called worse. With this environmental movement, and I said as soon as Time magazine anointed Greta Thunberg as Time Person of the Year, that made existential fear cool, and that allowed children to make it cool to brag about being afraid of smoke. And when that happened, all I could think of was that there's going to be some parent out there that's going to look at their kid and look at Greta and think, you know what? My daughter or my son will be the next Aaron Brockovich against, X, Y, Z. I see that coming. I do. I really do. What's your thought on that? Am I crazy, or can you see that?
Oh no, I think you're absolutely right. And it's just a matter of time. What strikes me about all of this is that it's not organic, in my opinion. This isn't just happening. It's not just popping up here and there spontaneously. This is a well-crafted, well-funded campaign. And, there's certain groups that are behind it and certain people that are funding it. And that's what truly, that's, I think, is where we have to, to get in there and rip the mask off and make people understand this is, the classic setup is, the poor environmental movement, David against big oil Goliath. And frankly, it's the other way around. They're the ones that have far more money and are far better funded and coordinated than we are, than our response, sticking up for fossil fuels.
So I'm going to ask you one more question then, as long as I'm on a roll with you agreeing with me, because a lot of times I go to conferences and I'll talk to people in the industry and they don't agree with me on some of the things I'm talking about. One of the things that I've been saying since last summer publicly, even at conferences that I speak at and here on this program, is I think the energy industry has made a mistake. And the mistake I think they've made is, especially in the last couple of years, I believe they've been fighting and being in the midst of an energy debate while the opposition and the activists have shifted it to a public health debate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, they have. But the problem is that when we respond to those public health issues, and we expose, I've seen dozens of different, frankly, sham studies, quote unquote, that are published in, quote, peer-reviewed journals that say, fracking causes STDs, for instance. I mean, how ridiculous is that?
By the way, I saw that. Unbelievable.
But their logic is because these dirty tobacco chewing roustabouts move into an area and they're gonna screw everything around, and I mean it's disgusting. Their prejudice it just reeks and things like that.
But even when you take away the distraction of the outrageousness behind it, you have to say, God, somebody actually funded a study to do that.
I know, yeah, exactly.
And if it would have came any other way, they wouldn't have talked about it. So a lot of these studies that they're funding are predetermined before they even write the check.
Of course.
So anyway, sorry, go on.
So there's not, and then there's studies about, mothers that live close to fracking have low birth weight babies, and and then there's of course the classic from the beginning with Gasland was it's going to pollute your water, and you come back and you show chapter and verse, you refute it. You say, look, there's no scientific basis here. In fact, we can prove that this is not happening. And but by then, the seed has been planted months or years before that this is going on. So when you come along and actually refute this, it falls on deaf ears at that point. So we keep trying to fight this, losing battle of going around and debunking all of these things, these health debate things.
That's the crossroads where I'm at, because, you could give somebody a verified scientific study that has been cross-checked by every country, every scientist, and blah, blah, blah. And they'd look at it like it was, a turd sandwich. They don't care at all.
Yeah.
They'll show you some website that's got some tweets and, and 2 + 2 = 10. And they'll look at that and they'll say, well, look at this. And they'll show you something they find on their internet versus, like I said, verified data. There's a difference between verified science and political science, okay?
Yeah.
Verified science is when you've got multiple people that don't know they're checking on the same science, and then you get it done at the same time. You release the results at the same time, so that way you can see if it actually works out the same. Because if you've got all kinds of different results, well, then that's not really science. That's just somebody trying to do political science, which is create a paper to advance something along the way. And boy, that makes sense, because that was pretty ambiguous, I guess. Boy, I kind of lost myself on that one. Sometimes I get on my own soapbox and I got to step back. It's this new podcast format we're on. We're more free flowing and loose. Like a blog. You can just kind of do whatever. So. Anyway, just kind of what can we do is the question. What can we do?
Well, here's been my observation. My observation has been, so over time, I think we have had some success in countering these arguments that, these health arguments that cycle around, answering these sort of these slurs and accusations with actual science and data that show that it's not happening. And so what happens is they just drop it and move on to the next thing. And the next thing is the ultimate. So this is how it progresses. It goes from those like health arguments, okay, we didn't prove that. That didn't really strike a nerve. We couldn't shut it down with that. But they then pivot and say, but you know what? This methane that you're getting out of the ground, the soil you're getting, it's killing the planet. And so they pivot the argument over to global warming, man-made global warming, and we must stop using fossil fuels. And they put all of their efforts into that. And I mean, who can argue against that? I mean, all serious scientists believe this, and there's too much carbon in the atmosphere, and we have to do something about it. But every now and again, just for good measure, they'll return and do another health study just to sort of lob it on there and make sure that they can keep that fire stoked a little bit. But then they'll go back to global warming again.
Right. They always go back to consensus science. They never they never go to real science. They go to consensus science, which, it's
correct.
It's kind of the same thing that they do in mobs, right? Mob rules. Whoever, if you got the most votes, you win. I mean, that's the way it is. Anyway, well, we could sit at the bar stool all day and talk about life's worries and that sort of thing. But so talk to me how you make money, how people can give you some money, and how
Sure.
people can be entertained and educated and informed by the things that you do for the energy industry.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. And that's, as you know, Jason, the industry, to me, it's fascinating. But it can be dry. So I try to inject what I write with some humor and, make a few jokes and be kind of lighthearted. So I kind of bring the news with a twist. So I'm writing every day. My routine is to get up at 5 a.m. and I start in, and I'm reviewing the news and I'm looking for those things that, my mantra is, how can we make money with this activity in the Marcellus and the Utica region. And so the filter, the lens that I see through every day is what news pieces would be potentially profitable for people, whether they're in the industry, working for a producer or a pipeline company or a petrochemical company, or maybe they're a landowner or they're a lawyer or a government official, whoever they are, they all come at it from a different perspective, but I'm trying to bring them the news on a daily basis. And I publish by noon every day. I put stories out there so that people can read those. I do give a little bit away for free, but it costs $7.95 a month if you would like to read full articles. And I always offer the opportunity for people to sign up just to get the headline. If you just want to see, would I even be remotely interested in this? Sign up in my email list, which is right on the home page on the right-hand side. You can sign up to get the daily email Monday through Friday. So as soon as my articles are published, that email goes out with a list and a link to the articles, and you can just sample it a little bit and see, yeah, that looks kind of interesting, or it doesn't look interesting. It's not for everyone. I understand that. I write largely about the natural gas industry because that's really what our plays are all about, mostly. NGLs to some degree, and petrochemicals now to some degree because of the NGLs that we have in our region, ethane in particular. But yeah, it's a Monday through Friday. I've been doing this for years now, and I get to the odd industry conference here and there as well, and it's it's a blast. I mean, I just think it's a fantastic industry, and I'm a dyed-in-the-wool supporter, and part of my mission is to bring the truth of this industry to the masses. So I get about, I don't know, on a typical monthly basis, I'm getting around 50,000 unique people are coming and reading something on the website.
Well, we sure hope you'll come back and be a part of the Crude Life podcast and our other platforms, because our motto this year is ready for anything. And so far, as soon as we talked earlier about draping the kids in fake oil and using it to fight a teacher's pension fund. I mean, already we're not even into February. I mean, we are into February now, but then we weren't. Boy, you can't get much more ready than that. I mean, boy, I tell you, it's right out of the gates, and we haven't even started the political season yet. I mean, we got people out there getting paid to go fight the good fight, and they're already posting messages on social media. They're tired. I mean, it's not, we haven't even got out of the first quarter yet, people. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, I do think it's
for the long term.
Oh, you mark my word. The Green New Deal and the environment is going to be the number one topic going into this year's election, and Trump is going to combat it with the economy. And I'll tell you, it is going to be a war of where Trump actually is going to have the logic, and the platitudes are going to come at the other side, and it's going to be absolute nonsense. I mean, like I said, ready for anything, because you've got, we started talking about the different sciences and things like that. I mean, when your elected officials are just bowing down now because somebody shows a picture of, a goose covered in oil from 15 years ago, what can you do? I mean, it's a tough go, but, well, sir, all right. Well, let's see. MarcellusDrilling.com is the website. Jim Willis is his name, and we'll be chatting down the line, sir.
Sounds good, Jason. Thanks.